one of my big takeaways working on Teen Mom is watching those girls become famous and how hard that is, you know, like what does it mean when that lens is focused on you and not always in a positive way.
And welcome back. You're listening to Hysteria, the podcast for people who know that the true golden age of MTV was the Y2K era. I don't think we're going to have any disagreement there. Our guest today is a former producer of the MTV shows 16 and Pregnant, Teen Mom, and a couple of Teen Mom spinoffs. Now she's a producer as well as a writer, focuses on telling stories about women and power. Kenda Greenwood Moran, welcome to Hysteria.
Thank you so much.
I'm so glad you're here. Can you just, first of all, explain how you became involved in the OG version of 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom?
Oh, great question. I had been working on, a variety of different reality shows. I kind of fell backwards into working on unscripted television and documentary television. And I came up working on a show called Wife Swap.
Oh, I know that show.
Yeah. And then I was looking for my next gig, and I happened to just socially know Morgan J. Freeman, who was an executive producer who had been doing a lot of work with MTV. He's wonderful. And he had a little something that he was working on, a little pilot. He was like, we're doing this little documentary for MTV. It's about teen pregnancy. And, I don't know, maybe you'd be interested. So he sent me a couple of scenes that they had shot, and it was just so raw. It was just out there, with the girls who were pregnant, who were dealing with all that it is to be a teenager and pregnant in America at that time. And I watched it and I was like, yeah, I definitely want to be involved in this. And we went and we just made 6 episodes of a documentary series that no one thought anyone would watch. It was like, this feels important. It feels super relevant to the MTV audience. But like, is anyone going to see it? Who knows? So they give us a lot of freedom to just kind of tell their stories the way they really were happening, which was really nice. And then it was really a surprise when everyone watched it, when it really blew up. And then that was when we were like, well, the stories really are just starting when the babies are born. There's so much more. There's just so much more to see and deal with as a teen parent than there is as a teen pregnant person. I mean, both are crazy. And so it just kind of continued on from there. But it was really a surprise to all of us. It was crazy.
I remember it was a full-on phenomenon. Like everybody watched those shows. Everybody talked about, even people, like I was not in high school at the time. I was past high school. And even then people were watching it as like adults were watching these shows. One criticism that the shows got, and in many cases unfairly and before they even like really had aired and the cultural impact had sunk in, was that reality is inherently sort of exploitative to its subjects. How did you try to work around that? How did you try to prevent exploiting the subjects of the shows?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of people think about those shows as reality TV. At that time, our approach was really documentary. We really thought of ourselves as like partners to tell the stories that those young women, girls at the time, were going through, and working with them to tell those stories. The word reality TV sometimes connotes putting people into positions that they wouldn't normally be in. But in these shows, this was their lives. This was their real lives. And we were just kind of documenting, this is what their real life looks like. And working with them about what they were comfortable showing and talking about and all of that. And also in the beginning, I think the girls, nobody knew that it was going to be what it became, this big phenomenon. I think that we all sort of were really interested in like showing people, hey, this is what it's really like. It's really hard. And the girls were really invested in that as well, and like saying, you know, putting their stories out there in that context so that other kids their age could learn from them. And with that motivation behind them, I think that really propelled the show to come from that perspective rather than evil producer with an idea of how this should be kind of a perspective.
Right. Like that show that was about the behind the scenes of The Bachelor and how like
Unreal.
Yes. Yeah. As a producer, did you watch Unreal?
I did.
Did you find any aspects of it relatable, or did you recognize anything from the industry that you were like, oh, yep, that's it?
I think that there are definitely things that they got right that exist in the industry, and most of them were taken obviously much farther than than would happen in real life.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that was interesting about that show was some of the moral quandaries that the producers found themselves in terms of like, when you have a person who's really struggling and they're on television, like, what is your responsibility to that person? And that I found that was to me the most interesting part of that show. And I think is really real that like being on television is hard, like you're putting your story out there, putting your real life out there in this way that people can comment on and criticize, and when you're young, especially, like that puts you in a challenging place. I thought that was an interesting question that show played with of like, what does it mean to kind of put your story out there, and how does that make you vulnerable?
Right. Well, like the price of great television from a reality or documentarian's perspective is sometimes like, I have to show this person in a state of crisis to fully tell the story. But like, where does the intervention happen? Were there any moments when you were making any of the 16 and Pregnant Teen Momaverse shows that you were like, I feel conflicted about how we should handle this moment?
Yeah, I definitely. The nature of any show that's about someone struggling, any documentary that's about someone struggling, is that you find yourself wanting to intervene in some way, or wanting to be the shoulder that they cry on, or wanting to. So these questions do come up for sure. I worked with that cast for years, and I developed a relationship with them, and I came to really care about them. And so these questions come up, like, when is it my responsibility to say, like, oh, no, you're putting the diaper on backwards, or something more serious than that. And in general, because we came from a documentary perspective, there were things that from a moral perspective you had to intervene on. And then there were things where it was like, okay, I'm documenting, and that is that person's choice to make.
Right.
Even if I wouldn't make that choice,
Right.
that's that person's choice to make.
Right. Like they forgot to buckle their baby in the car seat.
Right. Like
that's
if there's
kind of
if there's like a physical danger or something like that, that's a different thing than like, that's a choice.
Okay. So, the show is airing. It's a huge hit. So that's like kind of wave one of you realizing like the influence of it. Wave two is there's been academic studies done about the show's impact on culture. And there have been, economists who have found, I found like a paper in like the National Economic Council, whatever, that was like the teen mom effect. And it showed that teen mom's popularity coincided with a huge drop in teen births in the US. When did you first realize that the show was doing that? And did you ever have aspirations for the show to do that as you were first making it?
100% for me, that was what I wanted the show to do. I was always conscious when we were documenting the stories of like, we want to make sure we see the hard stuff. And those were the conversations sometimes I would have with the cast is like, no one wants to show when they're struggling with something. That's not a comfortable thing to expose to the world. But I was always coming from that perspective of like, if we make it look easy, no one's going to know how hard this is. We don't want to put a story out there that's like, oh, it's so fun to get pregnant when you're 16.
Right, my super sweet teen pregnancy.
Exactly. So that was our way into kind of telling those harder moments, showing the struggles, showing the things that you don't get right off the bat, showing how hard it is to juggle work and a relationship that was not prepared for parenthood, and having your own parents and high school and, all of those things. Like, it was really hard to juggle. So it was critical. I mean, I think that just speaking for myself, but also knowing that, like, from a larger perspective, we all were really invested in making sure that it looked as hard as it was, and that came through in the stories that we were telling. So we were delighted that it did, that it seemed like that really did come through. I think the New York Times put out a piece, I don't know, it was probably 2010 or something like that, where they reported, they sort of credited the show with being at least partly responsible for a drop in teen pregnancy in America. And we were like, that's great. That's exactly what we were hoping that people would see and want to take steps to avoid. The thing that I found most surprising in kind of traveling to some of the communities where a lot of teenagers were getting pregnant was I assumed that for every single one of them, it was a shock and an accident and not something that they wanted. And for the girls that were on the show, that was true. It was all an accident. But there were other girls in the community that I was really surprised. They sort of had this idea that, like, well, maybe if I have a baby, I'll have someone who always loves me, or I'll get to, keep my relationship. Or, there were other young women that I met that had a fantasy about what it would mean to get pregnant as a teenager.
Oh, gosh.
That was just, like, so far off from the reality of what it would actually mean. So we really wanted to show the reality.
Yeah. Well, so you're a mother now. You have a young child. After working on a show that highlighted how difficult it is to go through pregnancy and birth and have a young child, like, have you gotten a new perspective since becoming a mother on the show and that experience?
100%. I mean, first of all, I think I underestimated when we were making the show how much they were juggling between being on television and having a new baby or having a toddler or having, now that first generation of kids is about to turn 16,
What? No.
Yeah.
What?
Bananas.
No.
I know.
Oh, stop. What is time? That's crazy.
Yeah. I knew because I saw it. I knew how hard it was, but I didn't know it firsthand. And now, having gone through that first year of parenthood and now being in the toddler years, I just have that much more respect for everything that they were going through in terms of, like, trying to imagine juggling a camera crew in my home while I'm trying to learn how to breastfeed and all of that other stuff is just, I have a huge amount of respect for them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Chasing a toddler around and trying to wrangle call times and stuff, that would be really hard. Also, like, with the emotional maturity that teenagers have is not generally high. I cannot imagine me as a teenager taking care of a toddler, just emotionally.
It's really hard. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that I waited as long as I did to have kids, because I was like, I don't know if I'm ready yet. I'm 35. Don't know if I'm ready yet.
You'll invite a camera crew for 35 and pregnant to your house. I mean, it never feels like the right time, but I think that this show really highlights how beneficial it is for you to have, like, a degree of emotional maturity, financial stability, and good people surrounding you. One thing that was always kind of, some of it was subtextual and some of it was very overt on the show, is that some of these girls didn't have the greatest people around them. Were there any cast members or any moments where you just kind of really, really hated one of the people that was kind of orbiting one of the Teen Mom cast members?
Sure. I mean, I don't know if I would use that word, hated. I think one of the things that really hit home for me working on this show was how much everything is generational, and it's just sort of passed down and passed down and passed down, and that like it's just really hard to show up in a way that no one showed up for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I would see that happen sometimes, how hard it was for parents to show up for their teenagers, how hard it was for everyone around them to show up in certain ways. There were also people who were tremendously supportive and amazing, but that there were certainly moments where I wished that these girls had more support. I wished they had more people in their community that could help, could be a powerful, positive example for them, all of that stuff. And it made me mad sometimes, for sure. But it really, I had a lot of, and I still have a lot of compassion for the fact that I really think that most of them were showing up to the very best ability that they had, because they probably didn't have a lot of support when they were that age. And it just kind of goes back and back and back, which is why I'm really proud of some of the cast members who really have broken that cycle and really have kind of like stepped out of absent parenting or addiction or all of these things that I think a lot of people deal with, and have created a better life for their kids. I think it's amazing to do that under those circumstances sometimes.
So at the time that you were making the show, a lot of sex education programs were being defunded, especially in places where some of these girls lived. Did you find that the culture wars around that ever came for you or the show because you were kind of providing a sex education in a way that their communities and their schools weren't?
I mean, not for me. I was never out there as the face of the show, and I'm not the face of the show. I am one producer of many who worked on the show and happened to be there, when we first started. But certainly there was backlash. And certainly, I mean, the way that I mostly experienced it was in the communities, that there would be certain family members or certain community members who would kind of pull me aside and say, like, what you're doing is evil, what you're doing is wrong.
On what grounds? Were you just like giving them too much information, or what did they think was evil about it?
I think that we were putting people on TV who had sex, premarital sex,
That's true. Acknowledging that sex exists is itself a sin.
Yeah.
Even though we are all evidence of sex by our very existence.
But, these were all people who had clearly had premarital sex, in some cases casual sex, and some, and I think a lot of people objected to that, just on the grounds of, talking about sex is putting ideas into kids' heads, and, you're MTV and you're supposed to speak to teenagers, so you should never talk about sex, because if you don't say it, they'll never get the idea, that kind of a philosophy, which obviously I think we've all been teenagers and we know that you'll get the idea no matter what.
Do you keep in touch with any of the cast members?
Occasionally. Occasionally I'll talk to some of them. Not regularly. When the original Teen Mom, we thought it was ending, but it turned out it was just a hiatus. But when it ended after 4 seasons, I don't think I ever would have left had that not happened, because I was so invested in my relationship with them and that partnership and telling those stories and feeling really responsible for those stories. But then when it did, I hadn't really had a day off in almost 5 years. I was like exhausted.
Yeah.
And I stepped away, and it was really helpful to not have daily contact the way that I had for 4 or 5 years with a lot of them. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I have an ongoing relationship with them, but the door is open, and I still have a lot of care for them, and am happy when I get to talk to them every now and then.
And they're like in their, they're in their 30s.
Yeah, they're grown-ups.
Oh my gosh, that is crazy. Do you think this show could be made today and have the same cultural impact, or are we all kind of reality TV poisoned and unable to be good cast members in the way that they were?
Yeah, I mean, the show's still being made. There
Right.
still are
I mean,
the
like,
Teen Mom, but it's a, it has
OG
evolved over the years.
Right. Like it felt like a different show than what is on today.
Yeah, and I think that the show had to evolve to respond to the fact that, it got to a point even when I was there that it became very hard to produce around the fact that they were well known. They were on the cover of Us Weekly. They had become, there were paparazzi outside their houses in, a random town in Indiana. It was very strange. And we were kind of trying to produce around that for a little while. And then it became clear that, like, no, this is their lives now, and we have to really be honest about that and tell the full story. So the show has evolved in that way. I mean, for me, I think the thing that would stand in the way is that what really worked about the show was how real it was. They were just super on the ground, honest, showing the hard stuff, showing the dirty stuff, the difficult stuff, and our relationship with reality, not reality TV, but just reality and truth has changed so much that I don't know if people would respond in the same way or believe it in the same way.
Yeah. And finally, what role did abortion politics play in the show? Like, I mean, it was a different era. Roe v. Wade still existed. The land was covered in lollipops and candy compared to now. Like, how did the show handle abortion, and how do you think that would be different today?
As a producer of the show, with some of the other producers, we would talk a lot about it, like how much was the possibility of an abortion, part of their stories. I think for a lot of our original stories, for those people, that was not on the table for whatever reason, having to do with their family's beliefs or their personal beliefs or, various other reasons. So it didn't factor in a lot to those original stories. There was a special done that followed one of the later season 16 and pregnant girls who got pregnant again and chose abortion, and the special followed her making that choice and doing that. And I was not involved in that special, but I was there when they made it, and I was really glad that it got made and that option was shown, because it wasn't ever really shown as part of our show, because it wasn't a choice that they were making. So I was really glad that we were able to do that special, so that was on the table as well as, like, this is also an option. You don't have to choose adoption or keeping the baby. There are other choices.
Yeah, you don't have to give birth.
Exactly.
You don't have to go through the whole thing because it sucks. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm so grouchy right now. 9 months pregnant. I want to roll out of here and into a hole. Okay, Kenda, final question. So you work on reality, telling women's stories. When you are, like, done with work, you've got like 2 hours to yourself. Imagine a world where that happens. Do you watch reality TV, or, like, how do you unwind? Is watching, like, reality something that just reminds you of work, or do you have, like, another way to kind of let off steam?
There are some reality shows that I'll watch. I see all the seams and I see all the ways that they're put together. So they have to be really good for me to...
What's a really good reality show?
I mean, I love Love is Blind. I think that's been fun to watch. I tend to, if I'm going to watch reality, I'll usually watch, like, a competition show. Like, I like the ones, Top Chef, and, the ones where somebody's showing off some skill they have. Or I love Great British Bake Off because everyone's so nice. One of my big takeaways working on Teen Mom is watching those girls become famous and how hard that is, like, what does it mean when that lens is focused on you and not always in a positive way? And it got me really interested in just, like, the concept of fame, and especially with women, what the fame machine how the fame machine kind of can chew up and spit out women no matter what you do. It doesn't matter if making a lot of mistakes in public or making no mistakes in public. Like, if you're Britney Spears or if you're Anne Hathaway, like, the fame machine is going to chew you up and spit you out no matter what, because that's what it's designed to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm just really interested in any media that kind of shines a light on that and talks about that, because I saw it. It's not great.
Yeah, I can imagine that it is not great. Well, Kenda Greenwood Moran, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Hysteria. I'm so glad that we were able to get you on before I took my leave. And thank you for all of your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm a huge fan of the show, so happy to be here.